Arvind Panagariya, former VC at Niti Aayog, now joining us. Mr. Panagariya, thanks for being with us. India has once again voted with a strong mandate. Do you expect NDA 2 will be more focused on reforms, as the economy is now going to be the focus and the priority going forward?
Of course, I think economy is the issue number one, and that impacts everything else that we do. Even our international standing actually gets influenced by how well the economy does. So most certainly, and I'm pretty confident that the Prime Minister will move on several fronts as soon as the cabinet is in place.
Mr. Panagariya, can you also tell us what should be the focus areas in the first 100 days for the new government? A lot is riding now.
Okay, so I personally think that, it would be good if the government in its first 100 days gives a very strong signal for its commitment to reforms. And to give that signal, it can do a number of things. These are things that can be on the budget when it's presented, because remember that the budget as previously presented was the interim budget, and the final one will be presented probably in July, maybe even in June. And I think, then or even before that, a number of things could be announced. I would say, for example, the corporate profit tax, right? There had been a commitment to roll it back to 25%, and of course remove the exemptions so that the actual collection of these taxes does not decline. That will be a very strong signal that on the margin the rate has been brought down to 25% as promised before. I think the government could also give a signal by rolling back many of the tariffs that had been actually raised in the past 2 years. On trade front, we have gone back. I think this is perhaps the only area where I would say that the government actually has done something that is inconsistent with its otherwise pro-reform stance. So roll back those tariffs, bring them back down, and actually commit to a continued, sustained trade liberalization agenda. So that's the second thing that the government can do to give a strong signal. Third thing the government can do is to also speed up privatization. This is an ongoing affair for the government, because in the previous term, several, about, I would say more than 24 public sector enterprises had been approved for privatization by the cabinet. It is time to actually carry out that mandate. Once again, I think, it is feasible to do about, on average, one privatization or privatization of one public sector enterprise per week. At least on average, so it doesn't have to be every week, but...
Given that the financial sector is going through a tough time, because on the one hand, the NPA resolution is taking far longer than banks are in need for fresh capital infusion. They need it soon to restart growth. Do you think that the new government would take some tougher decisions on this front? There's the NBFC mess as well, and that really needs attention and needs to be sorted out.
I completely agree with you, actually, and that was also one of the items on my list, which I forgot to mention. So I'm really glad you brought it up. I think in the first 100 days, the government also needs, and it is sort of, what I said about the Banking Regulation Act amendment actually is quite connected to that, because it was on the strength of that particular circular that, we saw the Jet Airways issue move so rapidly, that the promoters were actually let go within a short period of time and so forth. So at that time, this February 12th circular was still in force, and that I think was an important catalyst. So that the amendment of the BRA, Banking Regulation Act, is related to this. But more broadly, I totally want to echo you that the NPA cleanup needs to be speeded up. I think we have made huge progress. So I don't want to downplay what we have successfully done. I think under the IBC, the acceleration that has already happened is completely unprecedented in our 70-year history. So I'm very pleased with what we have done. But I think that there are some bottlenecks which need to be removed. We ought to do that. And I also agree that capital infusion needs to be done in the public sector banks, because at the end of the day, if you are really trying to resuscitate private investment in a short period of time, the credit expansion, credit growth has to take off in a big way. And so this is where I...
Sure. Mr. Panagariya, India is also facing the worst slowdown in consumption that we've seen in a while. In fact, we rarely ever see it. What needs to be done, on that account? The case building up for stimulus now?
Absolutely not. Actually, that will go completely contrary to what I have just said about restraining borrowing by the government to finance its expenditures. I personally think that the industry needs to shape up a little better. I mean, I have never understood, I must say, this whole talk about consumption slowing down, because the global economy is large. The merchandise export market alone is 17 trillion. Why doesn't the industry look up to the export market? I think it's their fault. So the industry, if it complains, and particularly auto, when you say, for 70 years, they have been protected with 100 plus kind of tariffs. It is a punishing kind of price that our customers are paying for automobiles. Why should they have to pay 1.5 times the price that everybody else in the world market pays? So the industry needs to shape up and really go for the export markets. They do not have even 1%, full 1% point share in the global auto exports. After 70 years of protection, if that is the performance, I must say that, they need to be actually exposed to competition. Let the tariffs fall. Allow the imports even of automobiles to come in to compete with these domestic producers. How long are we going to protect them and not protect the customer?
Yeah, that is certainly a very pertinent point. But let's talk about the other looming issue. Ever since the US-China trade war has come to fore, some strategists believe that India can be a big beneficiary of this. We can strengthen the Make in India scheme if done well. What do you think it would require for us to do in order to achieve that?
Yeah, again, you touch on my favorite subject, actually, and I've been one of the foremost, probably the original advocate of this. There are two reasons, in fact, not just one. First, the wages in China have really gone up now, and our wages are significantly lower. So that alone actually gives us a big advantage in large number of labor-intensive industries, such as apparel, footwear, furniture, all sorts of light manufacturers. And that's what we need to create good jobs for the masses. We are too enamored by the IT industry alone, which is of course very important for the country. But IT industry will never be a huge employer. Today, maybe IT industry employs 3 million people, but we have got a workforce which is over 500 million. And most of it is actually either self-employed or employed in very tiny little enterprises. So we need to up our game in those industries. And with Chinese wages having declined, Chinese wages having risen considerably compared to ours, I think we have a real opportunity there. The second, of course, is what we have just said, which is the trade war between the United States and China. And I've also maintained that, these tensions between the United States and China have deep roots, and therefore it's not going to go away so quickly. And that, of course, does give us a major opportunity to break into both the American market, because Chinese now are facing higher barriers in the American market, and in the Chinese market, because now the Americans are facing high barriers in the Chinese market. So you've got a double opportunity there. And what you
Sure, Mr. Panagariya, sorry, we're running a little out of time, but finally, do you also see a case for consolidation of some of the central ministries? Will that improve effectiveness going forward?
I absolutely think so, which is the reason I put it out, that we have some 50 plus, somewhere between 50 and 60 ministries. Now, the only country that comes even close to us, but is in terms of numbers, it's still below us, is Sri Lanka. But if you leave Sri Lanka aside, most major countries in the world have less than 35 ministries. So I can understand that it will be difficult for the government to go down to 35 ministries, but certainly we ought to aim at getting down to at least 40. Now how does it improve the efficiency of the government? You see, today with so many ministries, it inevitably happens that any change you want to make involves 4 or 5 different ministries. And then each ministry wants to protect its turf. Sadly, I must say that, this I found repeatedly in my experience at the Niti Aayog, that the ministries do not work in national interest. They work in their narrow interest of the ministry itself. And even...
All right. Mr. Panagariya, unfortunately, we're completely out of time. Would have loved to stretch that conversation forward. Many thanks for joining in with your expert take on what needs to be done to revive the economy. I guess we'll only know in a week's time or so.